Every empire learns this too late. Wars don't end when the fighting stops. In 1670 BCE, Rome did something no empire had done before. It abolished its war tax permanently. Citizens cheered. The treasury was flush with plunder from Macedonia. Why bleed your own people when you can bleed the conquered? Flash forward to 2021. The United States spent over $2 trillion on wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Imagine the entire economy of California gone. Not a penny came from a war tax. Instead, it borrowed every dollar. Here's the part you need to remember. By 2050, American taxpayers will owe $6.5 trillion just in interest. That's triple the original war cost, paid by people who never voted for the war. Same pattern, different trap. Rome thought foreign tribute freed it from taxing citizens. America thought borrowing spared voters from sacrifice. Both discovered the same truth. Someone always pays, just not who you think and not when you think. This is the story of how wars are financed. Not the romantic version taught in schools, the one written in ledgers, bonds, and the fine print of surrender. The world that appears true. For most of history, there were two ways to pay for war: tax your people now, or borrow and make them pay later. The choice seems technical. It's actually existential. When Rome faced the Ve in 406 BCE, it created the tributum, a property levy on citizens. Wealthy landowners paid soldiers out of their own estates, then collected reimbursements from taxpayers. The system was transparent, brutal, direct. You declared war, your citizens opened their vaults the same year. But here's the trap. Taxation makes war expensive up front. It forces leaders to justify the cost before the first arrow flies. Debt does the opposite. It makes war feel cheap. It pushes the bill into the future, onto people not yet born, who can't vote for it today. The first shackle. The hinge moment came in 1694. England was bleeding money in war against France. William III needed to rebuild his navy, an impossible sum for a government with terrible credit. Enter William Paterson, a Scottish merchant with an idea that would change war finance forever. In plain English, this is what happened. Private investors would lend the crown £1.2 million. In return, they'd get a royal charter to operate as the Bank of England, with the power to issue banknotes backed by the government's promise to repay. Parliament said yes.
Think of it as a mortgage. The government got cash to fight today. Investors got a money-printing franchise. Future taxpayers got the bill. The Bank of England wasn't just a lender. It was a machine that turned war into profit. And once the machine existed, borrowing became easier than taxing, politically, emotionally, fatally. Then the music stopped. The Napoleonic Wars devoured Britain's finances. From 1793 to 1815, the national debt exploded to over 200% of GDP. Here's what that means. Britain owed double what its entire economy could produce in a year. Think of it as having a mortgage twice your annual salary, except you're a whole country. Britain had financed the war almost entirely through borrowing. Why? Because raising taxes mid-war risked riots. Bonds postponed the pain. Lenders got interest. Soldiers got paid. Politicians got re-elected. But debt has physics. Compound interest doesn't care about victory. By 1815, Britain was spending more on interest payments than on the military itself. Here's the dependency. Once you finance one war with debt, the next war must be financed the same way, because you're already paying interest on the last one. It's a ratchet. Venice learned this in the 14th century, when wars with Genoa forced the city to issue more bonds, even as it defaulted on interest from prior wars. Bond prices collapsed from 92% of face value to 19%. The myth was that debt would be repaid from victory spoils. The reality, debt becomes the new battlefield, one fought by accountants, not soldiers. The snap. World War I shattered the illusion. In 1914, the major powers assumed the war would be short. Germany expected to fund it through borrowing, then extract reparations from the losers. Taxes seemed unnecessary. Bonds seemed sufficient. 4 years later, the bill arrived. This is the number that changed everything. Britain's national debt had soared from £650 million to £7.7 billion. That's 12 times larger in just 4 years. Like your mortgage jumping from $100,000 to $1.2 million. Germany financed nearly 90% of its war through debt, refusing to raise taxes significantly. The Allies did the opposite. Britain and the United States covered about a quarter of costs through new taxes, including expanded income taxes. The divergence mattered. Countries that taxed during the war could borrow more afterward. Countries that refused, Germany, Austria-Hungary, saw their currencies collapse. By 1919, the question wasn't who won, it was who can still pay their debts. The takeover mechanism. World War II locked in the system. Britain entered the war already drowning in debt from the last one. By 1945, it peaked at 249% of GDP, the highest in its history. Here's the part you need to remember. Governments discovered they could control the cost of debt by fixing interest rates artificially low. The U.S. Federal Reserve capped yields at just 2.5% for long-term bonds. The Fed stood ready to buy any bonds private investors refused. It was financial handcuffs dressed as patriotism. Buy war bonds at fixed rates. The government wins. Lenders lose to inflation. But by the time citizens realized they'd been paid in depreciated dollars, the war was over and the institutions were permanent. During World War II, the Fed purchased 7% of new U.S. debt directly. In plain English, this means the government was printing money to pay for war, but doing it through the back door of the central bank buying bonds. What happened next wasn't a battle, it was a surrender, by savers to inflation, orchestrated by their own government. The pivot. After 1945, a fork in the road. Britain spent decades unwinding its war debt through a mix of economic growth, modest inflation, and slow, grinding austerity. The United States chose differently. For Korea, Vietnam, and especially Iraq and Afghanistan, America didn't raise taxes. It didn't sell war bonds to citizens. It simply borrowed, quietly, through regular treasury auctions, with no special war debt label to remind voters what they were funding. From 2001 to 2019, the U.S. spent $2.2 trillion on direct war costs. That's roughly 10% of the entire economy. But unlike World War II, when taxes covered 39% of costs, the post-9/11 wars were financed almost entirely through debt. The hidden price? Interest. By 2050, even though war spending stopped in 2019, the interest alone will exceed $6.5 trillion. That's $3 of interest for every dollar of war. This shields the American public from the costs currently. No war tax, no bond drives, no shared sacrifice. Just a number on a spreadsheet that compounds silently, year after year. The new patron isn't a foreign power, it's the bond market itself. Aftermath. Who paid? Not the generation that voted for war. In Rome, the tributum was abolished in 167 BCE after the conquest of Macedonia. Citizens escaped taxation because tribute from provinces replaced it. But within a century, Rome's reliance on foreign plunder made it fragile. When conquests slowed, the treasury hemorrhaged. In Britain, the Napoleonic debt took a century to unwind. The Victorians balanced budgets and ran surpluses for decades. They paid, their grandchildren paid. In America, the bill is still growing. The Congressional Budget Office projects net interest costs will double from 1.3% to 2.7% of GDP by 2031. In plain English, sovereignty means this: the freedom to fight is limited by the interest you can afford. Once debt exceeds a certain threshold, you don't control your budget. Your creditors do, or at least their expectations do. The beneficiaries? Bondholders, central banks, the financial system that sits between treasuries and wars. They don't conquer territory, they don't plant flags, they collect interest decade after decade on blood that was spent generations ago. Modern echo. Here's the principle that generalizes. Taxation forces a society to decide if a war is worth fighting. Debt lets leaders defer that decision until it's too late to say no. Rome abolished its war tax in 167 BCE and thought it had found freedom. Britain borrowed its way to victory in 1815 and carried the debt for a century. America financed 2 decades in the Middle East without asking citizens for a single extra dollar in taxes, and will pay triple the original cost in interest alone. The mechanism is always the same. Leaders choose debt because it delays the reckoning. Voters accept it because the bill arrives after the parade. Bondholders enable it because war is profitable, not for those who fight, but for those who finance. Venice's bonds, Britain's Bank of England, America's Treasury auctions. The names change, the trap doesn't. Every war is paid for. The only choice is whether you see the bill before the first shot, or decades later when you can't refuse it.